Welcome back, Modern Lending Podcast listeners, to the final podcast of season 3 stories. I'm really excited to bring on Brian Bogert. I'm gonna introduce him and bring him on in 2 seconds here. But man, I heard this guy first on my homie Brian Covey's podcast, and I was like, I need to connect with this human being. So Brian's a performance coach, a speaker, a business strategist. But here's where his personal life philosophy is like connected to me. And when you hear those people speak and you're like, oh my gosh, I need to get in more of this. How to embrace pain to avoid suffering. People before profits and who before what. And when we get into Brian's story too, you're going to realize he is not without his share of hardships that he's had to overcome in his life. And as we dive into perspective, I want to leave you with that word as we end 2021 and go into 2022. So without further ado, let's kick it off. All right, dude, let's go. Brian, good to see you, my man.
What's up? So here's the thing, man. I've heard you on a couple of your shows, but I've never watched your intro before. And you told me we were going to play this little jingle. And then you do this whole badass reel, man. Like that whole thing is hot. That got me fired up, ready to go. So I'm excited to be here with you, bro.
So I'm first of all, thank you for hanging out at the end of season 3 for this storytelling season. I love that what you pour into the world, dude. I love your vibe. I love your energy. And I'm excited that you're going to be wrapping up this season with me today. So I'm thankful for you, man. Dude,
I'm grateful to be here. And again, Brian Covey, man, he's the connector between both of us. So give him a shout out because that solid human being with that pure, warm heart, man. It's he's always putting good into the world. So I'm blessed to know you, brother, through him.
Dude, until you meet his wife, who's just the better version of him. That's when you know he married up big time.
I mean, we've been friends on Facebook for a long time. So though I haven't met her, that's been pretty obvious. I can tell.
Yeah, you can tell.
He definitely outkicked his coverage.
Well, dude, okay, so I want to start right here on the embrace pain to avoid suffering. It's on your shirt. Yeah. I'm vibing on this. Before we get into your background and your story and kind of what you've come through in life that could be helpful to the crazy salespeople in mortgage, where did this come from? Where did embrace pain to avoid suffering come from?
Yeah, so I kind of have to give a little bit of my story for you to understand that because it was developed through adversity and pain and suffering. And so I'll hit the story part relatively quick today because I know we're going to go in a bunch of different directions. When I was 7 years old, my mom, my brother, and I went to our local Walmart to get a 1-inch paintbrush. As we were headed to the car, right, I was standing there waiting for my mom to unlock the doors. But this was back in the day, before key fobs, so I had to wait for her to catch up. A truck pulls up in front of the store, parks, and the driver and middle passenger get out. Passenger all the way to the right feels the truck moving backwards, and he scoots over to put his foot on the brake. And instead of hitting the brake, he hits the gas, catapulting him 40 miles an hour across the parking lot right at us. Went up and over the median, hit our car, knocked me over, ran over me diagonally, tearing my spleen, leaving a tire track scar on my stomach, and continuing on to completely sever my left arm from my body. So this was August 10th, 1992. It was a 115-degree day in Phoenix. And my mom and brother watch this happen. They look up and they see my arm laying on the pavement 10 feet away. Right? I'm going to expedite the rest of this. I'm not even going to go through the rest of that story because what I know for a fact is, look, I'm here, my arm is reattached, and there's been a whole hell of a lot of perspective that I've gained through this and many other things in my life. But that is where this concept came from. So I know that the people watching today were not expecting it to go there today. I know you were, anybody who's seen me, right? My story is one that we tend to remember. But here's the beautiful thing. All the time I've been doing this, I've realized, I have a unique story. But every single one of us does. So what's important is that we pause and become aware of the lessons we can extract from those stories and then become intentional with how do we apply them in our lives. And guess what? We all have the ability to do that. We also all have the ability to tap into the collective wisdom of other people's stories to shorten our own curve to learning and gain a little bit more perspective. Okay,
brother, that's the nugget right there.
It's good. Well, here's the thing, right? On. So you asked me how this happened, right? So at 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, although I was the one having multiple surgeries, going through years of physical therapy, having to actually deal with the actual physical pain, I was also kind of being guided through the process. So I was a little bit in a fog. My parents, however, were not. They were intimately aware of the unceasing medical treatments, years of physical therapy. And the idea of seeing their son grow up without the use of his left arm was a source of great potential suffering for them. So they willed themselves day in and day out to do what was necessary, to do what was tough, to embrace the pains required to ultimately strengthen and heal me. So again, whether it was intentional or not, what they did was they ingrained in me this philosophy and way of living, which is to embrace pain, to avoid suffering. And it took me a long time to really understand what this means, how to apply it. But I can tell you definitively that if we apply this holistically in our lives, it is also our greatest path to freedom. So we not only get to embrace pain to avoid suffering, but we also gain freedom. So that's where the concept came from. I'm sure we're going to unpack it a little bit here.
Well, so, I mean, translate this into your professional life. I mean, obviously you grow up, that's a whole thing. I'm sure there's stories after stories of that experience of just, being different and having to deal with adversity and, all that stuff. And so, now you're deciding to jump into the work world. What did you do?
Yeah. So I spent 15 years in risk management and employee benefits consulting, and it was a great place to enter into the world. Really enjoyed it. And, I came out of the school thinking, I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I was going to take over the world. I don't know if you knew that, Alec, but I was ready to take over the world. I was literally on that path. And so, I came out and I had some early success and had some opportunities to go run some offices, and declined some of those and leveraged them into senior leadership at a relatively young age. But the reality of it is each step along the way, this concept kept hitting me in the face, right? I mean, we hit a point in 08, 09, right, when rates and exposure units were dying on the tail end of the economy, right? And we were in a situation where I just realized I was out of alignment with the firm that I was with at the time. And so I had to embrace the pains required to literally take a leap of faith and go start something to build and scale an organization with some of my partners from 0 to 15 million within the span of a decade, right? That ended up being a really amazing opportunity. And I would have guaranteed suffering if I didn't embrace the pain and take that risk and leap to put myself out there and expose.
Yep.
If you look at how this applies in my life in general, a few years back, 2019, my wife really challenged me and had said that fear had entered in my world in a way that she'd never seen it, right? She knew that I was limiting myself, that I was barely scratching the surface of my potential or the impact I wanted. And I was dying a little bit inside every day I lived in insurance. And so the reality of it was, she said, look, we took a big bet on you once. Let's take another bet on you, and let's go see the impact we can have on the world. So guess what? I had to embrace the pains required to unpack the fear, the shame, understand what that meant that was going to keep me confined in a business that was already operating out of success, to go take a leap of faith to put myself and others in a better position, right? So I embraced the pains required to avoid the suffering of not ever knowing what impact I could have on the world. So, those are two examples I use in the concept, bro.
We're going right into that because there's such a relevant connection to what you just said. So in the mortgage space today, in sales today, it was happening pre-COVID, but COVID exposed it all. There's this new place to play. There's, because my business and my salespeople's business is relationships, always has been, in community, local, flesh to flesh, belly to belly. I know you, you know me, and you trust me, and it's relationship centric. And then all of a sudden, we got forced out of physical relationships. We got pulled out of it. But at the same time, that wasn't humans were already pulling out of the traditional stuff. There was digital was becoming massive. Social media has been blowing up around us. It's been happening. COVID didn't just invent this. Yeah. It was happening.
Yeah. It was just an overnight success, right? This whole internet.
Yeah. Thing? Yeah. This whole internet thing. Yeah. So it was happening all around us. And so at the same time, I'll give you the smallest example of what you're talking about, and I want you to expand upon it.
Yeah.
These new places make people feel very uncomfortable. These new places bring up all the old insecurities that they had to deal with before in the physical realm, but they figured it out. And now things like getting on camera, things like social media, sharing things, they don't know where's the line, what should I share, not share. I don't, this kind of fear is still prevalent. It never really went away, but now it's like in your face. Because now it's like, because Brian, I tell people all the time, you gotta figure out how to be on camera, my friends. Like, this matters. Oh, it matters. There's a place where humans are there. There's a place where connections are happening, and you're missing it. And yet we're all afraid a little bit. And so you were just talking about it. How do you push through that? How do you coach through that? How do you get somebody to let go a little bit of what's going on here and embrace this stuff? I want you to spend a minute on that topic.
That is a way deeper topic than we're going to be able to cover today, but I'm going to hit it in a high point. Okay.
Yes.
Because what you just hit on is something really, really powerful. And I think that what you're indicating is that so many people feel like they're stuck because they have the wrong strategy and tactics. right? So you say, get on camera, talk more, right? And we can talk about all the technical aspects to setting up a studio. We can give you all the path, but if you don't actually overcome the ability to get yourself in front of camera, it doesn't really matter what strategy and tactics you deploy.
Yes.
But so many people are looking for that next set of strategy and tactics. That's why there's so many 7-step systems out there, which by the way, you know more of those, right? Yes. And so that's not what I'm going to give you today. But the reality of it is again, if it's not that, even though strategy and tactics are important, what really keeps people stuck in the work that we understand is that it's really a combination of emotional triggers, behavioral patterns, and environmental conditioning, right? And until you can truly understand where those things impact you over time, right, you will constantly repeat the same patterns in your life, right? Until you understand that that 500-pound telephone isn't really weighing that much, but it's your fear of success that's preventing you from actually closing the deals, because it's not about the relationships, the solution providing, it's literally your call hesitation, right? When you understand that that might be tied to shame, scarcity, right? Some element of an emotion that's got a deep trigger in it in your life. Guess what? Once you start to move through that, understand that, embrace that, and you allow yourself to feel so that you can heal, all of a sudden you start to move faster with less effort in life. So where we focus so much is embracing the pain of actually allowing yourself to heal, right? Because the world has told us to reduce, eliminate, or avoid pain, right? It's don't feel, show up with a smile on. It's literally operate in a certain way that fits within inside this box that the world is going to approve, right? And so all it does is create this toxic shame environment, because you used a really great word. Should I post this? Should I not post that? Should I get on camera? Guess what? Should is a shame-based word, because it implies that whatever you're doing isn't good enough. So why don't we first just start removing that word and start asking ourselves, what could I do differently? What would I do if I had different skills, tactics, or understanding of myself? And then how do I use this knowledge to embrace the pains required to become the person I'm capable of being and avoid the suffering of repeating those same patterns in my life?
Yeah, I like this concept that pain and suffering are different things.
Oh yeah, big time.
No, this is important. This is important to dissect.
Yeah, it is,
because they're different things.
They are.
How do you view them differently?
Yeah, so I'll just give you the definition of pain, because I think it's the first place to start, right? So pain, if you look it up, is literally defined as short-term, intermittent to direct cause from something and alleviated once that direct cause is removed. It's literally how pain is defined, right? Then we as human beings screw it up like we do everything else, Alec, by putting adjectives in front of it, because we try to change the definition, right? So we put words like acute and chronic in front of it. Now, acute maintains the definition just inherently, but chronic changes it, because it implies that it's no longer short-term, right? It's not intermittent, and it's not alleviated once that direct cause is removed. It persists. Let's stop calling that chronic pain and call it what it actually is: suffering. Now, pain gets lots of attention, and that's part of the reason we call it pain, because it's short-term and intermittent. And guess what? It's a reactionary response for fight or flight survival. 100 years ago, you cut your leg, you could die. But that's not the world we live in anymore, right? And so I say we. Some parts of the world still live in that, but for the most part, it's not our reality. Now, if we understand that, then let's stop looking at pain as something bad, right? But we tend to not want to acknowledge that suffering exists, particularly when it's a direct result of our choices.
Yeah.
So I'll give a few other examples of what this looks like so that people can relate this in their lives to the difference between pain and suffering. Okay. We can embrace the pain of hitting the gym for 30 minutes a day to avoid the suffering of aches and pains of a sedentary lifestyle.
Yep.
We can embrace the pain of a difficult conversation with a loved one or spouse to avoid the suffering of a loveless marriage that's going to end in divorce, or being trapped in a marriage when you actually want divorce. We can embrace the pain of the fit our kids are sure to throw by having them put down their mobile devices at the dinner table to avoid the suffering of years of lost meaningful connection and conversation that we will never get back. And as business owners, we can embrace the pain of firing our top salesperson to avoid the suffering of losing all our other top talent and having stagnant growth because they were the greatest cancer in our culture. Right? This applies to everything in our lives, but we have to start to understand that it's actually those pains between where we are today and where we want to be that are critical paths to our success. You see, I believe that we all must choose our pain, or our suffering will choose us.
So I love that concept. I absolutely agree with it. And you've heard this, I'm sure, a million times. You know, people run from pain, and they chase dreams. But I found out that they rarely chase dreams. They mostly just run from pain. and it's that pain of discomfort. And so, but you're saying it's you got to run towards the pain that drives the success. Because here's what I'm trying to articulate poorly. I see people moving away from pain in very minute ways that isn't actually embracing pain.
Correct.
They're just like, you know what, this is uncomfortable. I'm not going to do this right now.
Yep.
Making these calls making this video, post this is, I'm going to go check email.
Yeah.
And so how do you flip the mindset of that? How does somebody go and change their whole, because they've been probably living 30 years, 20 years doing these micro pain movements.
That's right. And by the way, to your point, living with 20 or 30 years, it means you don't flip the switch and it goes away overnight. Right? You don't undo 30 years of patterns, right? It's through intention. So you said something that's really critical, and I want to start there because there's really I say we're not doing a 7-step system, but there's kind of 3 ways to think about this concept, right?
Sure.
And it's a progression. So it's not like we're giving you the secrets to success because you've got to apply it in your life, but it's a concept. And you said something, most people chase dreams, but they don't really chase dreams. You're exactly right. And so that ties to the very first concept, which is we have to acknowledge the suffering we wish to avoid. Most people set goals incorrectly because they protect themselves, right? They don't really chase their dreams. They chase what they think they should be chasing based on what the world has defined, right? And so they set goals. If they really have to lose 30 pounds, they'll say, oh, I'm going to lose 15. And guess what? They're going to not hit 15 and hit 12. But if they actually shot for 30 or stretch it a little bit further to 35, they'd fall to the lowest common denominator and probably exceed whatever they were actually chasing. Right. But we protect ourselves in the way that we operate. But we also only focus on the positive. We focus on the goals, the things that we want. Guess what? People avoid pain. Guess what? We should also be thinking about how do we avoid suffering? And yes, I did use the word should, right? Because this is one of those times where I'm going to tell you that you will have more conviction towards your path if you also understand your suffering that you're wanting to avoid. If we set our goals, we set our suffering, we've got our bookends. Now we know where we're going to be in the lane in the middle. Okay. So I'll give you an example. I've got a client. He's 38 years old. He moved 26 times before the time he was 18. Lived with his mom, his grandma, his dad, his aunt. Never lived in the same place twice. Never had the same set of friends twice. Okay. It's a lot. The guy now, fast forward to today, he's 38 years old, has a beautiful wife, 2 beautiful daughters. But guess what? He's got a deep level of shame, a deep level of self-worth, and he never learned how to give or receive love. And he's been used to being a nomad and protecting himself for decades. Because that's the only way he's known how. Guess what? He is not operating as the man, husband, and father that he is and is capable of being because of all the layers the world has put on top of him. Right? So he's got to understand, okay, my dream is one day I've got to sit here and understand that I've got a vision of sitting on my ranch with my wife in Texas with the wind blowing through the brush when we're 80 years old. And the only thing breaking the silence is the laughter of our kids and our grandkids in the background. Great. He's got a really vivid goal, but now he's got to anchor in the suffering because guess what? Suffering for him definitively is a life without his wife and kids. Now he understands that the purpose can overtake the pains required for him to do the healing necessary to become the man, husband, and father that he is and they deserve, right? The next step, though, is important because we have to identify the pains we tend to avoid and learn to embrace them.
That's right.
Okay. So goal setting is first because we understand we've got to set our goals. We also have to not protect ourselves and we've got to understand our suffering. Now, what do? I'll give a personal example on this one.
Yeah, great. I love that.
Okay. Left arm was ripped off. I don't have a tricep. My bicep is my gracilis from my leg. I don't have a lat in the left side of my back. I've got major imbalance. I have a curve in my spine because of the imbalance. About 15 years ago, it started to develop not just from like chronic pain, but truly suffering. It started to become debilitating. It started to get to a point where my life was being impacted. And so I realized if I stayed lean, I stayed fit, I ate the right foods, I kept core strength strong, that I could mitigate most of that. Okay. So what do? I do what everybody does. I'm going to go get healthy. I'm going to join a gym.
That's right.
Right. And guess what? I went consistently for 30 days and then I stopped going. Guess what? That's what most people do. Right. And I'm not bashing on most people. That's what I would have done if the situation wasn't different. But I'd already gone to the step of understanding the suffering I wished to avoid, and I was experiencing it real time. So there wasn't an option. I had to ask myself additional questions. Is it the pain of working out, the pain of lifting weights, the pain of stretching, the pain of plyometrics that I'm avoiding? Or is it the anxiety I get in the crowded gym? For me, it was definitively the second. So again, it wasn't about the strategy and tactics that I followed that. I would have gone and joined the Orange Theory. I would have gone and joined the Cycle Bar. I would have tried to figure, but really, I don't operate well in a big box gym. I don't operate well in that environment. That's not my environment for success. So guess what I had to do? I had to embrace the pains required to take the time, energy, and money to build out a home gym so that I could set myself up for success and create the environment that would allow me to do so. Right? It's no different though. You look at this again, we used a 500-pound telephone. That example that I gave literally came from working with someone. And it was a woman who ran a successful business, but she hated calling and she always called it the 500-pound telephone. Literally, she was brilliant. She could talk to any business owner. She could extract problems they're having in the world. She had a very clear path on how to communicate solutions. She could close and convert deals, but it was just generally the pipeline, just like the development from the phone that killed her. Well, guess what? What we started to realize is that she had a deep level of shame that manifested into a fear of success. She was afraid of what it would look like if she was actually successful on the phone because she was already at capacity in her business and she hadn't thought through building the systems and processes, nor had she identified that it was actually the fear keeping her stuck, rooted in her shame. So once she unpacked that, she started to build the systems and processes to be able to execute what she needed. And guess what? That telephone no longer weighed 500 pounds because she realized it was all about what she already did. And so we have to understand those pains between where we are today, where we want to go, because it's not about putting ourselves into unnecessary pain. Like that's ridiculous.
Okay, that's a good comment. Yeah, but let's go a little bit deeper on that, Brian, because some people might hear this and go, okay, I need to pick that phone up. And because it goes in your example, right? Instead of investing systems, I could see somebody misinterpreting that and being like, you know what, I'm just gonna power through this. I'm just gonna go into the pain.
Yeah. And so here's the thing. Putting ourselves into unnecessary pain without actually doing the healing is only continuing to expose that wound and almost guaranteeing suffering as well.
Great comment.
And guess what? I know that from personal experience because guess what? I had a fear of that 500-pound telephone.
Yeah.
And when we scaled our last business to over 15 million over the span of a decade, the reality of it is the further and further I got into it, the more I understood myself, the more I started to realize, guess what? Early in my career, I hammered through that. And what did I end up doing? I started expending more energy. I had a bunch of resistance. My energy wasn't dialed. So I was hammering through the phone. But guess what? The person on the other side was emotionally intelligent enough to pick up the fact that I was operating from scarcity, desperation, trying to just push through because I could just push through the pain. If I make 5 more calls, I'm going to do this. Guess what? That used to be my own narrative. Stress equals growth. That was my narrative. Stress equals growth. I always said the more I embraced pain, the more I pushed on this stuff, the more capacity I could raise and gain. Guess what? It also guaranteed my absolute suffering and the amount of times I crashed and burned, losing who I was because I chased all the whats of the world instead of aligning with who I was, right? And so when I started to take back control of these things and really pay attention to this, guess what? I could move faster with less effort. I didn't have to make as many calls because my energy was actually better. I was more calculated. I had more vetted prospects. I was able to actually be thoughtful about how I was doing it. And oh, by the way, the more success we had, the less scarce I was. And I also understood that it was my own shame that was preventing me from being successful on the phone sometimes.
Yeah.
So again, use it, understand it.
This is a really big concept, Brian. So I'm gonna push a little deeper onto it because I think it's worth somebody sitting in and unpacking. You know, embracing the pain, but also understanding that there might be healing involved. You know, the way you describe those stories, to me, was about embracing the pain in a different way. That's how I experienced your comment, because it wasn't just about pushing through. It wasn't just about but at the same time, you know, I want to balance that with, you know, a silly example. People say, how do you get comfortable on video? I say, you do more videos.
Yeah.
And so it almost feels like, well, you just got to kind of push through a little bit to get there. So how do you navigate, you know, when do you push through, or when do you have to reassess, hey, wait a minute, I'm moving. I need to push through, but I need to have systems in place. I need to reboot. I need to refocus, or I need to understand what's really going on with me. Before pushing.
That's a really great question, Alec. And it, as you would expect, right? It's as much an art as it is a science, and it's hard to answer because it's different for every person.
That's
but I will try to answer as best as I can because this is such an individual thing.
Yep.
You ask, like, when do you push through, right? How do you know when you push through? I don't always believe that pushing through is the most positive, healthy way of viewing it because it implies that there's a limit.
Oh, good comment.
It also implies that you are hitting a wall and you're pushing through that wall. I'm not a believer that I told you stress equals growth. I also know at this point in my life, my new definition after really understanding this and understanding studies between intermittent and peak performers, and the greatest difference was that the peak performers sustained over time actually treated rest and recovery as important as any part of their discipline.
Ooh, yeah. Absolutely.
Now my equation is stress plus rest equals growth.
Yeah.
Right. So again, if there's a wall, I would argue don't push through that wall. Right. And so instead, I'd rather you refine your process through reps and understanding what does that actually look like so that you can hone your craft versus just repeating it. Here's a great example. Okay. Last year I was training for a triathlon. I got in the pool with a coach right out of the gate because of what this was. And I was going through and I wanted to make sure that my form was good and everything was going to be okay.
Smart.
He gave me some tips. He focused on my form. We did it. And then I swam for 2 months, thousands of yards. Right. And then I started to feel like I was developing some things that weren't quite moving. I was expending a little more energy. So I called him and I said, hey, can we have another session? He made 2 adjustments. He literally changed the way my head was positioned and he changed the way I finished my stroke. 2 adjustments. I started immediately moving faster with less effort in the water. Now I could have pushed through that and just kept hammering through with horrible form, right? And expending my energy unnecessarily.
Yeah.
And conditioning and training myself because I'm pushing through. I can do this.
Yeah.
I'm tired. Or I can get really smart about how I do it and make just 2 minor tweaks. Right. And sometimes those minor tweaks are there. So I don't believe people should push through. I think they should figure out how to break beyond, because it's not about a limit. It's about it's about recognizing that we don't have limits other than the ones we place on ourselves or the world places on us. And so instead of pushing through to say, oh, I've got to hit the sales quota, are you in alignment? Are you doing this appropriately? Is the energy actually transferring correctly? How are you positioning yourself in terms of your language, your words, your knowledge on the phone? Are you trying to sell somebody out of the gate because you want something from them? Or are you reaching out to them to add value into their world because you want something for them? How are you actually focusing on establishing yourself in this process? Trust me, if you aren't thinking about picking up the phone this way, then you're missing opportunity. Because if you're just going about the motions, then you're following the same strategy and tactics that everybody else is telling you need. I'm telling you, you really want to break these patterns in your life, you have to do something different and start inside out.
So I want you to go a little deeper on that comment, because it's something that it's near and dear to my heart, and I think people need to hear it as often as possible. You mentioned how you're positioning, your conversation. And I see this on social media a lot. I see people on social media posting a lot about themselves.
Yeah.
Here's my latest Yelp review. Look how amazing I am. Here's my latest, closing. I closed in 7 days. Here's, and it's just like, humble brag or straight out just brag all day long. And you framed it more eloquently, talking about, no, what's in it for them. So frame that up for somebody who is, looking to continue to push their message out, looking to have a place in social media, whether it's, having a place in deeper relationships. How do you frame up what they should be saying and talking about?
Well, I'm going to avoid the should, because I think everybody has to find their own voice. And I think that's really, really important. So where you do find your own voice is through reps. You start to find your cadence, your message. How do you do those things? And so that is one of those times I say, find reps, find ways to get reps, actually going through and practicing and refining your craft. Again, not to push through, but to refine, because it's not like there's a final destination. We're a constant evolution of ourselves, right? We just have to constantly find ways to get better. And so when I look at this in general, and Alec, I just had a complete lapse of thought. Remind me of the question. Thank you for your patience. I don't know what happened. It left. And
it happens to me all the time.
Bring me back, bro.
So you were talking about framing how they present their information.
Got it. It's all back now. So I think that you've got to find a way to actually add authentic voice. But again, if you just focus on how do you establish relationships in the digital world, again, not wanting something from someone, but wanting something for them, right? There's this concept of detachment that I have looked at for a long time. And for me, detached is the concept that I don't need to be right. I want to get it right. Yes. And so if I'm detached from any particular outcome, it allows me to focus on the process that's going to lead getting there, which again, if you focus on how mortgage lenders in general, mortgage brokers in general have leveraged this, it's through relationships. Yep. Right? Relationships happen over time. They happen over a process. They don't happen overnight. You don't meet somebody and then all of a sudden you're number one customer. I mean, it happens, but rarely, right? So rarely. Like you build relationships because you have to establish trust. You have to establish credibility. You have to establish relevance. People want to be able to do business around those things. And yes, in the mortgage business, people chase rate. But if you build your business based off rate, you're going to lose your business based off rate. Yep. If you build your business based off relationships, you're going to keep your business based on relationships. And so that's what I would say is like, don't focus on so much, how do I highlight what we're doing, but where and how are we adding value? So if you want to highlight successes, why don't you make the success be about your client getting into a new home? Yeah. Not that you had this, but celebrate their successes, first-time home buyers or the first time as a family. Find a way to celebrate the win of the process versus highlight the role you played in it, right? There's no limit to, one of the greatest quotes I was told a long time ago is there's no limit to there is no limit to what one can accomplish as long as they care not who gets the credit. If you create an ecosystem of impact focused on relationships, value, and impact, and it's not what can I get from my audience every 2 minutes, guess what? It may be a longer game, but it's a stickier game and people are going to stick with you longer. But that's how relationships work. And so I want to be really clear here. This is not an attempt to drive people to our platform or to say that we've got it all figured out, because we don't. We are constantly changing and refining. But if you go to our social, we're not typically talking about wins. Yeah. We're typically putting out content to elevate and empower people. We're literally focusing on like concepts, application, abstract, esoteric thought. We put out so much free content because the point is I'm not asking people what I want from them. I want them to know what I want for them, which is to be able to apply these concepts in their lives, whether they hire us or not. We're on a mission to impact 1 billion lives, bro. right? I'm very aware that 99.9999999999999% of those people will never pay me $1, and I'm very okay with that.
So every loan officer needs to go back and just listen to that clip again from Brian. Listen to how he framed up his messaging, his content strategy, because you need to have the exact same heart on your content strategy. I'm okay, Brian. I'm going to go a different direction here, and you can take this wherever you want. I've asked this question to every guest on every season so far, and so and you've already mentioned 2 of these things, so you can hit that again, or you can go in a different direction. Okay. So, I want to know about a transformative experience that you've had in your life. What was happening? What happened? And I like to describe it as a fork in the road. And I think we have multiple forks in the road. Some are small, some are major, but they've changed the direction of your life. And you mentioned, of course, your arm. And then you mentioned that part in your career when it was time to jump and you had it there. So you can go off those, or you can bring another one up, but I want you to share a story around it, because there's somebody out there who's going to resonate with that, who's probably experiencing a similar place, even if it's just a mental space. And I'd love for you to share one of those experiences.
Yeah. There's one that was going through my mind the whole time you were talking. So although I've got 100, I'm going to just stick with where I was being drawn. It actually is an interesting combination between my story and my profession, but it's also related to something I said earlier around sometimes we just create intellectual narratives without truly understanding like the emotional component.
Yeah.
And, I did that, right? Truly. When my accident happened, I will tell you that like I gained perspective immediately. I know that's what these things are all about, is perspective, because I was in a situation in the ICU where friends, family of all the people were coming into us saying, we're so sorry for what happened to you. And then come to find out their kid's laying in the hospital bed next to me with a terminal illness, not knowing if it's going to live another 30 days. So even though I didn't have my arm at that moment, right, that was the case. But then what that led to was I started walking around out of the hospital relatively quickly with a sling on my arm. And everybody would ask me, what happened to your arm, right? Everybody always asks, but they're expecting me to say I fell off a jungle gym, I fell off my bike, I broke
not
arm,
that I got ran over.
And I literally would look at them deadpan in the face like I was run over by a truck and my arm was torn off, right? As a 7-year-old and 8-year-old. And they would, all of their jaws would drop. And then they'd look to my parents for validation.
Yeah, is he lying?
Genuinely, right? So part of my shame deeply was ingrained by the fact that most people didn't believe my own story. Okay. But what that also transferred into is I was really against being defined by other people's boundaries created by the lens they were viewing my situation through, what they would be capable of in. And so I looked at that and said, okay, great. I'm going to create a mental narrative. I'm tough. I'm strong. I can do anything. Right. As long as I set my mind to it, I don't need anybody. I can do it myself. And by the way, I crushed a lot of cool shit over the next 15 years. Right. Did a lot of amazing stuff. And I really honed my mental focus, my mental toughness, my mental acuity. And then I'm snowboarding when I'm 20 years old. And I was a decent snowboarder, went in trick parks, did all these things. I knew how to catch edges, all these things. I went down. I don't say any of that to brag. Right? I caught a bad toe edge. I went down, hit my elbow, and snapped my left arm again in the same spot that it came off at. Now I'll save a whole bunch of the story that went in between that. But the reality of it is I went 10 months with my arm hanging by my side, went through 7 surgeons who were all afraid to touch me because of medical malpractice. It was a compound fracture. They didn't repair it appropriately to begin with. And I ended up getting scar tissue between the bone and had to go back into surgery to get it repaired. Okay. 10 months later. So I went 10 months with an arm hanging by my side with a bone that could clip a nerve and artery at any point because it was just loosely wiggling in my arm, through multiple treatments of all these people saying it's going to heal. And I was like, okay. Well, now all of a sudden I'm not in a fog. I'm 20 and I'm experiencing all these same similar things as a 20-year-old as I did at 7, but without a family that was guiding me through the process. Guess what? It very quickly exposed the flaw in an intellectual narrative because the world bought into mine. Yeah. I had a lot of friends, family, and people that were there, right? But guess what? Nobody showed up to help me because they just believed Brian's good. Brian's strong. He's capable. He doesn't need any of our help, right? And so it became very clear to me too that I did not have the courage in one of my most vulnerable periods in life to ask for help either. And so that next period was really focused on understanding human connection beyond mental toughness. And it helped me realize that vulnerability and authenticity are really the glue that binds human connection. And so this transformative experience of me going through a lot of the healing process as a 20-year-old that I did at 7 and all the PT, because at 10 months of an arm not being used, I had to rehab it completely to be able to use it again. So I've rehabbed my arm twice. Yeah. Right. And what that led into was really a whole new focus in how I was going to build my businesses focused on relationships, right? Instead of just what we could do. And lots of lessons and failures along the way beyond that point. But that was a transformative experience to help me understand the value of human connection.
So let's talk about human connection for a little bit. I found culturally, so I'll give you a little bit of a tangent, but I found culturally in my own organization that through COVID and through the kind of disconnection, I would say, that has occurred through the cultural change that just happens when you're used to being in a place, hanging out every day with people, and now you're kind of in your home, and now you might not go back. Some people don't want to go back. Culture's just changed. Human connection is just changing. Now we're on Zoom calls, and to be cut. I mean, they're wonderful. Thank God for technology, better than just all on a conference call. But Zoom fatigue's real. At some point, you're just like, this is kind of bullshit. Can we just hang out?
Totally.
So how do we continue, since we're so relationship oriented? How do we continue to drive human connection in a digital physical world? We got variants floating around. It's just an uncertain time. How do you deepen human connection in this environment?
Well, I think we need to remove the shields and the armor that we all carry.
It's a good comment. But what do you mean by that?
Protect ourselves
from what?
I think that our world is starving for authenticity and authentic leadership, and they don't know who to trust right now. They don't know what sources to trust. Right? Everything is being politicized and polarized. Everything is through the lens of being separate. And so I really think that so many of us have also lost the desire for elements of human connection because we don't know where we can trust it. And so we've got our armor up, and we ourselves lack the ability to demonstrate vulnerability and authenticity. Even to your point earlier, what should I put online? What shouldn't I put online? What am I going to be criticized for? What am I going to judge for? And it's triggering all these things while we're all desperately seeking to have a more safe environment that we can operate in so that we can feel seen and understood and connected, because that's what we want, right? So if we look at the human experience, right, I bucket it into 4 categories. I think the human experience in general is rooted in 4 things that we all seek and desire. We all seek and desire to feel safe. We all seek and desire to feel protected. We all seek and desire to feel seen and understood. And we all seek and desire to feel connected. Guess what? Human connection is the most important. Connected is the one we desire the most, but it doesn't exist unless the first 3 do. So when we protect ourselves, right, what we're doing is we're putting armor up because we're afraid that who we are isn't good enough for the world, so we can't expose who we are because we'd be too vulnerable.
Yep.
Right? So what do? We protect ourselves, literally. So when we don't feel safe, seen, and understood, we protect ourselves. We put our own armor up, which is funny because a couple of things happen by doing that. It actually prevents a lot of things that we actually want. When we put our armor up, we are safe, but we aren't going to be seen and understood, and we aren't going to be connected, because how can somebody see and penetrate through our armor if we're carrying it so heavy? Okay. The other side of it is, guess what? That armor gets heavier and heavier the longer you carry it. And so it's incrementally crushing you over time. But let's just use a small analogy. Imagine 5-pound dumbbells. Alec, how long could you hold them in front of you?
Yeah, and just maintain it, just out there in front of you. It's like a minute, maybe.
Yeah, it gets heavier the longer you carry it. So it literally starts to, and then guess what? Not only can people not get in, but you can't actually get out.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're in this protected realm. And so we start putting all these layers, and we start shoving down all these emotions, feelings, and things that happen to us in our world, because we can't show to the world that we're hurting. We can't show to the world that we're struggling. We can't show to the world that we're desiring connection. So we just shove it down. That armor protects us. But the other thing that happens, the third impact of creating that armor, is the more we push down, the more pressure builds up, and at some point it will explode.
Yeah.
And when it explodes, it will create damage in your life and the lives of people around you in a way that you are almost guaranteed to not have connection for a period of time that you want.
Yep.
And so I would say that what we really need to start leaning into is, let's stop focusing on the what's of the world. What house, what car, what amount of money, what amount of success. Let's start focusing on the who's of the world, right? I lost who I was, right? And when it was only when I started to shed the layers of the world, which was really shedding the layers of my armor, that I could get back to the core of who I was, that all the what's in my world became a manifestation of who I was. So in this world of human connection, connect. Who cares if it's virtual? Be real. Be great. Be you. Don't project. Don't focus on the highlight reel. Focus on the stuff that binds us, which again is vulnerability and authenticity. It is the glue that binds human connection. So if you don't want to protect yourself, guess what? Leaders in homes, leaders in businesses, leaders in everywhere, we have the ability to help people bring their walls down. You know how we do that? If we all know that we've got 4 areas, guess what? Being safe and being protected are not the same thing. That's why people protect themselves, so that they feel safe. But if we as leaders of households, we as leaders of businesses, we as leaders of communities can put our own armor down, put ourselves in a position where we just assume and trust that we will be safe, then what we're allowed to do in that moment is create a protection around the environment that we're in, so that everybody else can feel safe and bring their walls down. Then we all are seen and understood. Then we are all connected, and we can do that in a virtual world.
I love that. And I want to just spend another minute on it, because the virtual world tells us, just like the real world does, that you need to be something that you're not. It does. It feeds that.
It does. No, it does.
It feeds it,
all day
especially
long.
with the what I call, Instagram like culture of like, it just feeds this. My life is perfect. Showcase the best view of your family when I know that you're fighting 2 seconds before and you're bribing your kids with candy, like, because I'm doing that to get that family picture.
That's right.
Yeah, everyone's fighting, and it's like I'm taking all your screens and I'm giving them away, and here's candy. What can I bribe
Wait,
you?
I didn't yell at my kids. No, who yells at their kids? No,
Yells at the kids. Not me. Like 5 minutes ago.
Exactly.
So the world and the virtual world is telling you got to be perfect. You got, and that's just it's a lie, obviously.
Yeah.
But what have you found to be the best way to come out of that? Step out against that. Showcase your authentic self without the fear.
Well, that's a great question. And you said fear, so I was going to take it a different direction until you said the word fear, but I'm going to hit on fear for a second, because that is truly what we're afraid of, right? We are afraid that we are going to be judged. We're afraid that we're going to be isolated. We're afraid that we're going to be defeated. We're afraid that we're going to be tapped into a worth. We're afraid that we're not going to get the validation that we desire. We're afraid we're not going to get connection, right? We've put all these connection points in the virtual world on vanity metrics.
Yeah,
right.
Totally.
And so, but it makes sense why, right? And so I think to answer this question, we need to look at it 2 ways. I'm going to answer it from fear, and then I'll start in a different way. Dr. Susan Jeffers has a book called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And she outlines things in 3 levels of fear. I'm going to skip the first 2 because although they're cool and important, level 3 is what she says the root of all fears is. So let's just go right there.
That's the hit.
Okay. So she says that the root of all fears is the answer to the question, can I handle it? Because the reality of it is, she says that if you knew you could handle anything, that you could move forward, that you were not going to be defeated, you weren't going to be isolated, you weren't going to be judged, and even if you were, you'd be okay. Yeah. You could handle it, right? Then what do we have to fear? Yeah. And so the way that we have to start doing that is realigning back with who we are before the world told us who to be. And when we think about why we react in fear, it makes sense, right? We're born as our most authentic, bright, burning light, right? Anybody who has kids or has been around kids knows that until age 5, like, they are raw. Yeah. But you see exactly who they are, right? And then what happens? Parents, teachers, coaches, employers, communities, society start saying, you should do this, you shouldn't do that, you should be this, you shouldn't be that, you should chase this, you shouldn't chase that, you should have this amount of money, you shouldn't have this amount of money, you should be this person, you shouldn't be that person, right? Yep. And again, we already talked about what should is. Should is a shame-based word. But what it also does is it starts funneling us down into this box that the world has told us we can fit in. Yep. And that's why we're afraid, because what happens if we step outside of that box that the world has created for us, right? What's going to happen, right? Am I going to receive the love and validation that I want, right? When we're working with people rooted in shame and fear and emotion and scarcity, right? So often it's coming from a place of not understanding how to give or receive love, not understanding what real connection is, not understanding how we can put ourselves in a place. And, oh, by the way, intimacy is rooted in vulnerability and surrender. Right. And I'm not talking sexual intimacy, although that's true as well. Yeah. Right. If we want intimate relationships that are the root of connection, that is the only path forward. But we have to first start by realigning with who we are. So again, it goes back to that concept of we got to shed those layers. So if people don't know how to do that, I want you to take 2 lists. Make 2 lists. The first, what are all the people, sources of information, environments, and things that you do that make you feel good? You're lifted, you're energized, right? 8 hours felt like 1 because you're in flow state. And it's just, you can't wait to run through that next wall, right? Yep. You can't wait to go talk to that person again. You can't wait to see that show again. The things that light you up, get you excited. We all know what that feels like.
Yes.
Make that list. Make a counter list. What are the things, people, sources of information, environments that you're in that make you feel defeated, depleted, lost, lonely, isolated, unworthy, right? Absolutely drained of energy, where 1 hour feels like 8. You just want to slam your head into the wall just to stop the pain, right? Guess what? We all know what that feels like. Mm-hmm. What I'm going to tell you is anything on that list that makes you feel that way is probably not in alignment with who you are. Start paying attention to the things on this list and systematically either removing them, reducing them, or refining them out of your life so that you can spend more time over here. Then you don't have a whole lot to be afraid of. No. And I will tell you that the more you push into vulnerability, the more you push into authenticity, the more you embrace that pain of the fear, overcoming the fear that we're talking about, that we are afraid of, right? The more you can avoid the suffering of truly not having lost, not actually having the connections that we desire, not establishing the brand externally that we desire based on who we are, right? And allowing ourselves to live free, with joy, freedom, and fulfillment, not confined by what the world has told us we need to do. So I think it's a combination of understanding fear to begin with. And then again, starting with, who are you? Truly, can you answer that question? If you can't answer who you are, if you can't answer the emotional triggers that confine your life, you're going to continue to repeat those cycles. And that's why we're on a mission to free people, because I know what it feels like to be over here on the positive side.
Yeah.
I also know what it feels to be like over here. I know what it's like to have lost myself, feel isolated and like I'm an absolute POS. But I also know what it likes to experience joy, freedom, and fulfillment, have true connection with my family, my wife, my kids at a level that I never thought was possible. Everybody deserves to feel this. Nobody deserves to feel this. So that's why we're on a mission to impact 1 billion lives. And we just want to show people the way, because it's easy in concept.
Yeah.
It's hard in application. And we avoid it because it's not fun. No. But what's on the other side is.
Brian, I want to end with this question, and I'm curious. I'm so curious because I've asked this all the time. I'm so curious where you're going to take this, and feel free to just open it up and run wherever you want to go.
Cool.
And remind, kind of as a foundation, normally all of my content is designed to helping a mortgage professional strategically grow, evolve their business. And I think today, as a perspective conversation, has been radical. So first of all, thank you for just bringing the fire. But here's the question I ask at the end. If you have a brand new mortgage professional agreeing to the business, and you got a 30-year veteran, and they're sitting down at the table in front of you, and they're looking for advice on how to grow their career, how to grow their business, what should they do? What do you say to them?
So my answer is going to be the same for anybody, regardless of industry. Truly,
I knew it would go. Yeah.
I think that so many people have actually lost or are afraid to show who we are. Mm-hmm. And so I would say, first and foremost, if you can't answer that question definitively, start by understanding that. Because if you understand who you are, you understand who you're doing this for, you understand who you want to impact, and oh, by the way, the really beautiful part, who you want to do this with, right? Then you can really, truly build your life of intentional alignment so that you can live a life of no limits other than the ones you place on yourself, which systematically you'll be able to remove. But if you align yourself with who you are, right, and you intentionally focus on who you want to impact with a message that's unique based on who you are, focused on building a relationship, adding value, and creating impact, then I don't care what industry you're in. Yeah. You will not only experience a better career, have better relationships, but you will also grow a bigger business and make more money. The reality of it is that is greatest challenge that I face with most of the business owners and entrepreneurs that we work with. Is whether or not they know it or can state it, they do not know how to answer the question who they are with absolute definitively, and their life is not built with intentional alignment. So there's a lot of stuff that doesn't fit. But when you go through that process, it becomes self-regulating. So if you're a brand new person in mortgage or you're a 30-year vet, if you're going to effectively build relationships moving forward, to be able to build a brand and a business and a life, you have to start with who you are. Yeah. And then you have to focus on who you want to impact and get to know them. Can you help them? What do you want for them? What impact do you want in their life? What value can you add, whether or not you get a paycheck? And if you continually invest down those paths, investing in people first, always, the profits will follow. That's why we say who before what. That's why we say people before profits. It's not that what and profits aren't important. Yeah. It's that if you start with who and you start with people, you will always win.
Bro, thank you for your time today, dude. This is a blast. If you don't know how to find Brian, you don't know how to use Google. So please, I know it's just a thing that's ridiculous, but I love the content you put out. I love the vibe and the energy. Thanks for hanging with me today. Thanks for wrapping up season 3. Super appreciate your perspective today. It's massively helping me. So I'm just thankful for that. And man, I really appreciate you.
Man, I'm grateful that you built a platform to pour good into the world and that you decided to shift to stories of perspective. That's the only reason I've got the opportunity to be here with you today. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to pour into your audience and add some value, hopefully, and continue to build our relationship. So thank you. Thank you for that opportunity.
All right, Modern Lending Podcasters, we will see you back 2022 with season 4 of the Modern Lending Podcast. Take care, everybody. Have a wonderful day.